The Alaska State Trooper's office in Palmer received the call at 4:17 p.m. on October 3, 1992. A man walked into the detachment claiming to be Marcus Dalton, one of two brothers who had vanished without trace during a hunting trip in the Talkeetna Mountains 5 years earlier. His twin, David, had not returned with him. The desk officer recognized the name immediately. Every trooper in the Matsu Valley knew the Dalton case. In September 1987, Marcus and David Dalton, 24-year-old identical twins from Wasilla, had driven into the backcountry near Troublesome Creek for what should have been a routine 4-day caribou hunt. Neither man came out. Search crews had combed 60 square miles of ridgelines and drainages. Not a single piece of gear was recovered. The file remained open, but after 18 months of dead ends, the case went cold. Now Marcus Dalton stood in the lobby, 40 pounds lighter, weathered beyond his years, refusing to speak until he could see the lead investigator from 1987. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy deep real-world investigations. Sergeant William Krause had retired from active field duty in 1990, but he still kept an office at the Palmer Detachment as a cold case consultant. When the call came through, he was reviewing topographic overlays for an unrelated missing persons case from 1989. The dispatcher's voice carried an edge he hadn't heard in years. Krause drove to the station in silence. He had carried the Dalton case like a stone in his chest for half a decade. He'd coordinated the initial search, interviewed the family, walked every grid himself with a canine unit. The twins had simply ceased to exist somewhere between mile 47 of the Denali Highway and the creek drainage 17 miles north. No blood, no fabric, no spent cartridges. Alaska swallowed people, but it usually left evidence. Marcus Dalton sat in the interview room with a paper cup of coffee going cold between his hands. Krause studied him through the one-way glass before entering. The man's face was gaunt, deeply lined around the eyes. His hands trembled slightly. He wore civilian clothing that looked borrowed, oversized flannel shirt, work pants cinched tight with a belt. His boots were new. Krause entered and sat down across from him. He set a cassette recorder on the table, pressed record, and stated the date, time, and parties present. "Marcus," Krause said quietly. "Where have you been?" Marcus looked up. His eyes were pale grey, the same colour Krause remembered from the missing person photo pinned to the caseboard for 60 months. "I need to tell you everything," Marcus said, "but you have to understand, David's still out there." The hunt had begun on September 11, 1987. The Dalton twins had grown up in Wasilla, third-generation Alaskans who knew the backcountry the way some men knew city streets. Their father had taught them to track, navigate by compass and sun, and respect the wilderness without fearing it. They were experienced, careful, and equipped with quality gear. They drove a 1984 Ford Bronco north on the Glen Highway, then west onto the Denali Highway's gravel stretch. They camped the first night at mile 47, a pullout near the McLaren River crossing. The weather forecast called for clear skies and temperatures in the low 40s, perfect hunting conditions. The next morning, they hiked north into the highlands above Troublesome Creek. The terrain was open tundra broken by willow thickets and alder stands. Visibility stretched for miles. Caribou moved through in scattered herds during early autumn, and the brothers planned to intercept a migration route their father had shown them years before. According to the recovered evidence from their abandoned vehicle, they carried a Brunton compass, USGS topographic maps in waterproof cases, a Motorola VHF handheld radio, 2 Remington bolt-action rifles, and sufficient supplies for 6 days. The Bronco had been locked. Their camp was still intact when search crews found it on September 16th. What happened in those 5 years? Marcus took a long breath and began. They had glassed a small herd on the second day, Marcus explained, moving northeast along a ridgeline about 8 miles from their vehicle. The caribou were undisturbed, browsing lichen in a wide basin. The brothers descended into a drainage to circle downwind, following a game trail that paralleled Troublesome Creek's upper tributaries. Around midday, David spotted something unusual on the hillside opposite their position. Through binoculars, it appeared to be a camp. A canvas tent, weathered grey, partially collapsed. No smoke, no movement. They debated continuing the hunt, but the camp's location was strange. It sat at the base of a scree slope, in a spot with poor drainage and no clear water access. Anyone experienced wouldn't camp there. Concern overrode caution. They crossed the creek and climbed toward the site. The tent was old military surplus, Korean War era, by the look of the grommets and canvas weight. It had been erected poorly, with one corner stake pulled free. Inside, they found a sleeping bag, a rusted Coleman stove, and a leather journal water-stained beyond legibility. No identification, no body. But there was something else. Pinned to the tent's center pole with a railroad spike was a hand-drawn map on heavy paper. It showed the surrounding drainages in meticulous detail, far more precise than their USGS sheets, marked in faded ink with 3 X symbols, each with a date notation. The dates ranged from 1952 to 1954. David pulled the map free and studied it in the tent's dim light. "This is old," he murmured, "really old." Marcus photographed the map with a Kodak 35mm camera they carried for documenting game. He shot 3 exposures, then folded the map carefully and placed it in his pack. They searched the rest of the tent but found nothing else of value. The journal's pages crumbled at touch. They left the site and continued north, intending to return to their vehicle by dusk. But as they climbed back toward the ridgeline, the weather shifted. Clouds rolled in from the west with startling speed, a front neither had anticipated. Within 30 minutes, visibility dropped to 50 yards. The temperature fell. They made camp in a willow thicket, pitching their own tent and firing up a portable stove. The wind picked up after dark, howling across the tundra with a sound like distant machinery. Neither slept well. The next morning, the storm had passed, but their compass behaved erratically. The needle swung in slow arcs, never settling on a consistent bearing. David suspected magnetic anomaly, not uncommon in Alaska's mineral-rich geology, but the effect was more pronounced than either had experienced. They attempted to navigate by terrain features and dead reckoning, using the creek drainage as a reference. But as they descended, the landscape began to feel wrong. The creek's course didn't match their memory. The ridgeline seemed unfamiliar. By afternoon, they admitted they were lost. "Would you have made the same call if you'd been in their place?" Marcus's voice remained steady as he described the following days. Kraus took notes on a yellow legal pad, occasionally stopping the cassette to flip the tape. The interview room was silent, except for the low hum of fluorescent lights and the scratch of pen on paper. They had walked for 3 days, Marcus said, trying to relocate the Denali Highway or any landmark they recognized. The compass remained unreliable. Their VHF radio picked up no signals, not unusual in the deep valleys, but frustrating. They rationed food and melted snow for water. On the 6th day after leaving their vehicle, they encountered a cabin. It sat in a narrow valley they hadn't seen on any map, built from hand-hewn logs with a sod roof. Smoke rose from a metal chimney. The windows were covered with oiled paper. A cache on stilts stood nearby, and a dog team was staked out in a clearing. An old man emerged as they approached. He was native, perhaps in his 70s, with a face carved by decades of wind. He spoke English with an Athabascan accent and invited them inside without question. The cabin's interior was sparse but functional, a wood stove, 2 bunks, shelves lined with glass jars and tins. The old man introduced himself as William Nicolai. He had been trapping this country for 50 years, he said, and rarely saw outsiders anymore. Marcus and David explained they were lost. Nikolai listened, then asked to see their map. He studied it for a long time before speaking. "You're farther north than you think," Nikolai said finally, "maybe 40 miles from the highway. The valleys confuse people. They fold back on themselves." He offered to guide them out. In exchange for help with his trapline, the brothers agreed. They stayed in the cabin for 2 nights, splitting firewood and repairing a section of roof before departing with Nikolai at first light. But the journey out took longer than expected. Nikolai led them through terrain that seemed deliberately circuitous, following old trails that wound through dense brush and over passes that added miles to the route. When David questioned the route, Nikolai simply said, "Safer this way." On the 3rd day of travel with Nikolai, they camped beside a frozen lake. The old man built a fire and boiled tea in a tin pot. As darkness fell, he finally explained. The map they'd found in the abandoned tent, the one Marcus had photographed, was from a prospecting expedition in the 1950s. 3 men had come into this country searching for placer gold. They'd hired Nikolai as a guide. 2 of them never left. "They didn't listen," Nikolai said. "Went into the wrong drainage. The cliffs are unstable there, rockfall." He pointed to the map's X symbols. Each marked a hazard, unstable slopes, hidden crevasses, areas where the terrain could kill without warning. The prospectors had documented dangers, not treasure. Marcus asked about the 3rd man, the one who survived. Nikolai stared into the fire. "He walked out alone. Took him 3 weeks. Lost his mind doing it." The implication was clear. The map was a warning, and they'd wandered into the same dangerous country. But then something happened that Marcus struggled to explain coherently. On the 4th night with Nikolai, a heavy snowstorm rolled through. They sheltered under a tarp, strung between spruce trees, the wind battering the canvas with relentless force. Visibility was 0. The temperature plunged. Marcus woke near midnight to find David gone. He called out, but the wind swallowed his voice. He crawled from beneath the tarp, flashlight in hand, and found tracks leading away from camp, deep boot prints already filling with snow. Nikolai woke and joined the search, but the storm made it impossible to follow the trail beyond 30 yards. They spent hours searching in a grid pattern, shouting David's name into the maelstrom. By dawn, the storm had eased and they expanded the search. They found nothing, no tracks, no response to their calls. David had vanished. Nikolai remained calm in a way that unsettled Marcus. The old man suggested they continue toward the highway and report David's disappearance to authorities. Marcus refused. He demanded they keep searching. They searched for 2 more days. Marcus documented everything with his camera: the last known camp, the direction of David's tracks before the storm erased them, the terrain features nearby. He shot an entire roll of film. But David was gone. Nikolai finally convinced Marcus that staying would mean death for both of them. Winter was arriving early. They had limited food. The search required professional resources: helicopters, trained teams, radio coordination. Reluctantly, Marcus agreed to hike out. It took 9 days to reach the Denali Highway. Nikolai left him at mile 52, pointing toward a distant vehicle that turned out to be a road maintenance crew. Marcus stumbled toward them, barely coherent. He told the crew about David. They radioed for help. Alaska state troopers arrived within hours. But here's where the story fractured. When Krause and his team interviewed Marcus in September 1987, immediately after his rescue, Marcus told a completely different version. He claimed he and David had been separated during a sudden whiteout on their 3rd day of hunting. He said he'd searched alone for days before giving up and hiking toward the highway. No cabin, no William Nikolai, no old map. The search teams found the Dalton brothers' abandoned vehicle and camp at mile 47, exactly as Marcus described. But they found no evidence of the northern route Marcus now claimed to have taken. No tent with a journal, no cabin, no trapper. Krauss had suspected trauma-induced confusion or hypothermia-related disorientation. Marcus was treated for exposure and dehydration, then released to his family. The search for David continued for weeks, covering hundreds of square miles. Nothing. And then Marcus disappeared. In November 1987, 2 months after David vanished, Marcus left his family's home in Wasilla without a word. He didn't take a vehicle. He withdrew $400 from his bank account, packed a single duffel bag, and walked out. His family reported him missing, but by then the trail was cold. Krauss always suspected Marcus had gone back into the backcountry, driven by guilt or obsession to find his brother. The assumption was that the wilderness had claimed both twins, just months apart. But Marcus hadn't died. He'd gone searching. The cassette recorder clicked as Krauss flipped the tape again. Marcus had been talking for nearly 3 hours. His voice was hoarse. "I went back," Marcus said quietly. "In November, before the deep cold set in. I had to find that cabin. I had to talk to Nikolai." He'd driven a borrowed truck to the Denali Highway and hiked north from the same trailhead. He carried the photographs he'd taken, the map, the camp, the terrain where David disappeared. He had a new compass, a better radio, and enough supplies for a month, but he couldn't relocate the cabin. He searched for 3 weeks, covering every drainage and valley within a 40-mile radius. He found nothing that matched his memory. The landscape seemed to have rearranged itself. In mid-December, facing frostbite and dwindling food, Marcus made a decision. He would stay, not for weeks, but for however long it took. He built a crude shelter in a willow thicket, insulated with packed snow. He trapped snowshoe hare and ptarmigan for food. He melted snow for water. He survived on stubbornness and a refusal to accept that David was gone without explanation. Winter was brutal. Temperatures fell to 40 below. The sun barely crested the horizon. But Marcus endured. When spring came, he moved camp and continued searching. He covered ground methodically, marking locations on his map with pencil annotations. He found old trapping cabins, abandoned campsites, rusted equipment from prospecting operations decades old. But no William Nikolai, no evidence of David. Years passed in this rhythm. Marcus would spend 8 or 9 months in the backcountry, then hike out briefly to resupply in Palmer or Cantwell. He took odd jobs, construction labor, warehouse work, earning just enough for food and gear. He spoke to no one about his search. He avoided his family, knowing they believed him dead or insane. In the summer of 1991, Marcus found something that changed everything. He was camped near the headwaters of Troublesome Creek, an area he'd searched dozens of times before, when he noticed a rock cairn on a low ridge. The stones were stacked deliberately, unmistakably human-made, fresh. He approached cautiously. At the cairn's base was a small bundle wrapped in canvas. Inside, a Brunton compass, their compass, the one that had malfunctioned, and a handwritten note on weathered paper. The note was in David's handwriting. It read, "Marcus, don't look for me. I found what I needed to find. Go home. D." Marcus stared at the note for a long time. The handwriting was unmistakable, but the message made no sense. David was alive. Where? Why leave a note instead of coming back? Marcus stayed at the cairn for 3 days, hoping David would return. He didn't. But on the 3rd evening, as Marcus prepared to leave, he heard a sound, a whistle, 3 short bursts, the signal they'd used as children. He ran toward the sound, scrambling up the ridge. At the crest, he saw a figure moving away through the tundra, distant but recognizable by gait and build. "David!" Marcus shouted. The figure paused, turned slightly, then continued walking. Marcus pursued, but the distance between them only grew. By the time he reached the spot where the figure had been, there were no tracks, no trace. He searched until dark, then returned to the cairn. The note and compass were gone. Kraus set down his pen. "You're saying David is alive?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I think so, but I don't think he wants to be found." "Why?" "I don't know." Kraus leaned back, studying Marcus's face for signs of delusion or deception. He saw only exhaustion and a strange, quiet certainty. "The map you photographed," Kraus said. "Do you still have those photos?" Marcus shook his head. "I lost the camera during the first winter. Fell through ice crossing a creek." "And William Nicolai? I never found him again. Maybe I imagined him." Kraus exhaled. The story was impossible to verify, but Marcus believed every word. Trauma could do that, create false memories, fill gaps with invented detail. But the specifics were too consistent, too grounded in plausible geography and behavior. "What made you come back now?" Kraus asked. "After 5 years?" Marcus looked down at his hands. "I'm dying," he said. "Liver disease. Doctor in Cantwell told me I have maybe 6 months. I needed to tell someone what happened before I couldn't." Kraus felt the weight of it settle over the room. "And you want me to find David?" "No," Marcus said. "I want you to close the case. List us both as presumed dead. Let my family move on. But you just said David's alive. Maybe. Or maybe I saw what I needed to see." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "Either way, he doesn't want to come back. I have to respect that." Kraus didn't respond immediately. He thought about the families he'd worked with over the years, parents, siblings, spouses, all clinging to hope, even when logic said otherwise. Closure was a myth, but sometimes people needed permission to stop waiting. "I'll need to reopen the investigation," Kraus said finally. "Interview your family, review the evidence. It'll take time." "I understand, and you'll need to stay available." Marcus nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." Kraus spent the next 3 weeks reinvestigating the Dalton case with fresh eyes. He pulled the original evidence boxes from storage, topographic maps marked with search grids, witness statements, the field logs from 1987. He interviewed the Dalton family, who confirmed Marcus had vanished in November of that year. The medical examiner who'd evaluated Marcus in 1987 reviewed his current condition. The liver disease was real. Marcus had months, not years. Kraus also contacted a geologist at the University of Alaska Fairbanks to ask about compass anomalies in the Talkeetna Mountains. The geologist explained that localized magnetic disturbances were indeed possible due to subsurface mineral deposits, magnetite in particular, but the effect would be inconsistent and temporary. Then Kraus did something unusual. He drove to the Alaskan Native Heritage Center in Anchorage and asked the staff to help him locate any trappers named William Nicolai who'd worked the troublesome creek area. It took 2 days of record searches, but they found a match. William Nicolai had been a registered trapper in the region from 1937 until 1968. He'd filed his last permit renewal in February 1968, then dropped off the records. No death certificate, no forwarding address. He would have been 72 in 1987, the right age for the man Marcus described. But the records listed Nicolai's last known cabin location as being 38 miles south of where Marcus claimed to have met him. Kraus sat with this information for a long time. It proved nothing. But it suggested Marcus hadn't invented the entire encounter. On November 1st, 1992, Kraus returned to Marcus's rented room in Palmer. They drove north together, retracing the route to mile 47 of the Denali Highway. The weather was cold, the first snow already dusting the high country. They hiked a short distance into the tundra, stopping at a vantage point overlooking the troublesome creek drainage. Kraus carried a film camera, the same model Marcus had used in 1987. "Show me where you think it happened," Kraus said. Marcus pointed north toward a series of rolling hills and creek valleys. "Somewhere out there, but I couldn't find it again. The land changes." Kraus took several photographs documenting the terrain. Then he asked the question he'd been holding since the interview. "Do you think David is alive?" Marcus was silent for a long moment. "I think he found something out here that mattered more than coming home. Maybe peace. Maybe a way to live that made sense to him. I don't know." "And the note?" "Real. I'm sure of that." Kraus nodded. He didn't ask for proof. Some things couldn't be proven, only believed or dismissed. They returned to the vehicle and drove back to Palmer in silence. The official report Kraus filed in December 1992 listed both Marcus and David Dalton as presumed deceased in the wilderness. The circumstances were recorded as exposure and navigational disorientation during a severe weather event in September 1987. Marcus's subsequent disappearance and reappearance were noted as trauma-related behavior, complicated by medical issues. The file was closed. Marcus Dalton died on April 2, 1993, in a hospice facility in Anchorage. His family buried him in the Wasilla Cemetery beside a marker for David, though David's body had never been recovered. Kraus retired 6 months later. He kept a copy of the Dalton file in his home office, alongside other cases that had never resolved cleanly. Every few years, he would pull it out and reread Marcus's statement, searching for some detail he'd missed. In 1998, a hunting party found an old canvas tent near the headwaters of Troublesome Creek. Inside was a rusted Coleman stove and a leather journal, rotted beyond legibility. The tent matched Marcus's description, though the location was 12 miles east of where he'd claimed to find it. No map was recovered, no other evidence. The tent was photographed and logged as unrelated historical debris, then left in place. In 2003, a trapper working the upper McLaren River drainage reported seeing a lone figure moving through the backcountry in late autumn, well beyond the season when most people would risk the cold. He described the man as lean, weathered, and moving with purpose. When the trapper tried to approach, the figure vanished into a willow thicket. The trapper radioed for a welfare check, but by the time authorities reached the area, there was no sign of anyone. The incident was recorded as a possible sighting of an unregistered backcountry resident and filed without follow-up. William Nicolai's name appeared one final time in public records in 2007, when a genealogy researcher for the Talkeetna Athabascan people identified him as having passed away in 1973 in a care facility in Glenallen. He was 78. If Marcus had met him in 1987, he'd been dead for 14 years. The story of the Dalton twins raises questions that resist easy answers. Did Marcus encounter a real trapper who helped him survive, or did isolation and trauma create a protective fiction his mind needed to endure? Did David leave voluntarily, finding something in the wilderness that civilization couldn't provide? Or did the land claim him in a way the search teams never discovered? The compass that malfunctioned could be explained by geological anomaly. The map Marcus photographed might have been real, a relic from the 1950s prospecting era that the storm and time erased from recovery. The note David supposedly left could have been Marcus's subconscious, giving him permission to stop searching. Or maybe some people choose to disappear, not because they're lost, but because they've found exactly where they need to be. Alaska holds secrets in a way few places can. The distances are vast enough that a person could live off the grid for decades, seen only occasionally by others who respect the unspoken code of the wilderness. Some people don't want to be found, and that's their right. Sergeant Krause never spoke publicly about his doubts regarding the case, but in private notes he kept until his death in 2011 he wrote, "I believe Marcus told the truth as he experienced it. Whether that truth aligns with objective reality is less important than understanding what drives a person to search for 5 years, knowing they may never find answers. Love does that. So does guilt. Sometimes they're the same thing." The Dalton case remains officially closed. No new evidence has emerged in over 30 years. The family, for what it's worth, has made peace with the ambiguity. David is remembered as someone who loved the wilderness and may have chosen to stay in it. Marcus is remembered as someone who loved his brother more than he loved certainty. What would you have done differently? If you appreciate real investigations like this one, subscribe and stay curious.